Vai tava problēma ir tā, ka esi sieviete? Mēs to atrisināsim. Mīļās dāmas un cilvēki, esiet sveicināti podkāstā starp mums, meitenēm runājot ar Džemmu sudrabu. I'm gonna do a small intro. Yeah, because usually this podcast is in Latvian, and we've done only one actually, which was also in English, which was with Veronica, who is living in an eco village actually here in Latvia with her family. And she was originally Polish, and although she speaks perfect Latvian, we still did it in English. And we decided that when, if we are coming to Komet, and there are so many inspiring and interesting women coming to the festival, we should kind of try and do a few podcast series in English. So I hope it's gonna work. So we have this recording on Saturday. It's early morning. People are having breakfast and waiting for their coffees. And I am together with Dani D'Emilia. Hi, Dani.
Hello.
Well, we haven't really prepared anything what we're going to talk about, but what I really enjoyed is so I googled you, and do you know what's like the fourth picture that comes up when you're being googled? No, that's the first one where you look intimidating and scary.
But that's not me.
It's not you?
No, if you Google, is this working? Yeah. If you Google Daniela D'Emilia, then another person in this world that has the same name but is a physioculturist. So her profession is to have a lot of muscles and to pose as a top model. So she comes up. So a lot of people do that and Google, and they think it's like a performance art piece that I'm doing, but really it's like the whole life of somebody else. And I think it must be really hard for her when they Google her and they find me, because I don't think she really likes what I do. So I don't know if you found her or... Yeah.
No, it wasn't. It was actually you. And then there's this video of you doing a performance in. So you kind of have a big arrow in your hands, and then you're attacking a car.
Ah, yes, yeah. Cerveira Bienal in Portugal.
Yes, yeah. Well, anyways, so you see it works. Googling you works, and I must also say that on the first line of Google results, there's also a picture of a vagina, just a random vagina, and I thought, okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah, that'll be mine.
That is yours,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not a good start
for
a conversation.
Don't know if that's where you wanted to start from.
I thought that you will say, "Oh, I didn't. Oh, this is so weird."
Yeah, no.
It's just a random one. Okay.
Yeah.
So when I'm reading your bio, it says that you are a transfeminist artist. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what is a transfeminist?
Sure. Actually, it'd be interesting to start from this place, because also when you're saying I'm inviting like women artists, I don't entirely identify as a woman. I think I would say more that I identify as a non-binary person, but I also identify as a woman because of all of the histories and struggles and commonalities that I also share with women. But in terms of gender, I really have a hard time with the gender binary. And I think transfeminist does a lot around that for me, because it really amplifies the subject of feminism beyond the woman category. So not only it breaks that binary between men, women, including trans folks, but on all lengths of the spectrum, also trans people that don't necessarily want to transition from one side to the other, but are in some range of the scale with whatever physical appearance that may take. But also transfeminism attempts to go beyond this type of binary and also recall a lot of the intersectional struggles that basically black women in the US have already been talking about for so long, and then not only in the US but also in Latin America and African countries and with diasporas all over the world. But that hegemonic feminism, Euro-centered or also US-centered, has left aside, and it's been a lot about white women. So transfeminism, I feel, is doing those two movements at the same time. On the one hand, including trans folks in all of the range of that spectrum, and on the other hand, also just recovering back in that intersectionality, also strongly questions of race, class, ability. Diversidad funcional would be like a better way, like
Functional
diversity, yeah. Yeah, and really strongly politicizing the various crossings that are in the subjects that need and do feminism, you know? Yeah.
So when we often hear that, you know, we shouldn't assume gender, for example, and one of Latvian artists, Marta Herca, she recently did a small cartoon where she was kind of, well, she was telling in this cartoon of all the situations where someone is asking her, like, are you a lesbian? Are you a boy or a girl? And she was expressing her kind of anger, that it really makes her angry that someone is just pushing her into one of the boxes. But how would you want this? So I suggested, you know, that I'm inviting women to the podcast, and you could become angry with that, or you were just annoyed, or how did you feel?
Yes, I could. I could probably become angry if I had other things crossing in my body, in my history, in my subjectivity. But from the place that I have grown to be the person that I am now, I also can feel honored by an invitation like that, and also find it a place in which we can then open up the subject and take it really as an invitation for conversation, as long as there is that willingness to also have the conversation once we're in engagement. I think there's a lot that categories and identity does to help us situate and place ourselves in the different modes that relationship happen, but a lot of the time, if they are the sole guiding forces and modes through which we engage, they stop a lot of things from being possible, you know? And so that would be the case for me with the category gender-wise, but it would also be in terms of like race, class, and other identity intersections that, or even profession, you know, that cross us and that are very important to talk to each other, acknowledging those, but they cannot, to me, forefront. Look at that. Thank you. Just got some coffee. They cannot foreclose the possibility of relationship happening. So I think my tendency usually is, unless it's, you know, unless it's a very clearly sexist positioning or homophobic, or which completely is not what we're talking about here, you know? So I think there's a need for me to open up spaces of conversation, and this is one of them. So I thank you actually very much for this space that you opened.
But do you see gender? Do you see gender as something that you perform?
Yes. Yeah. But this performance is happening in multiple spheres. So I do not perform gender on my own. I perform it within a set of relationships that make this performance possible, or also be interpreted in certain ways. Because, of course, depending on what context you're in, what cultures you're in, to perform femininity or masculinity can be slightly different. So that expression or that need that one may feel in coming from within, I think has a lot to do with the mirrors that we're getting externally and how they're being validated or not, or how they're being rejected or not. So to me, in my body right now, I know that I perform gender all the time and turn up the volume of masculinity or femininity depending on what safety requirements I feel I need, or what troubling or stirring the waters I feel like I would like to do, or also just how I feel that morning and what context I'm in, and how certain modes of walking or dressing or sitting may affect my relationships. I wouldn't say it's this rational. I'm not like, let me now cross my legs like this because in this podcast they will understand this, or let me, it's not that rational, but I know that my body is doing those micro decisions, and I know for sure if I'm walking alone at night and I'm feeling a little insecure because my body also has the experiences of being read as a woman and being attacked at night, the sadly very common stories, then I know that my body in that circumstances acts more masculine. I put my hoodie on, spread my legs wide, occupy more space, and walk home feeling more safe, and that's something my body does automatically. But it's a performance of gender for safety,
And when we were recording the previous conversation with Leon, and we were talking about kind of also the performance aspect of femininity, and how, for example, I feel like a bad feminist when I'm using a lot of makeup, because usually it's like part of a patriarchal bargain. When I look cute and nice and beautiful, then I'm getting something from the society back. Attention, maybe respect, that I fit in. So fitting in is an important part of kind of the way how I live through my life, and I have a lot of respect towards those people who kind of choose not to fit in, because I think it's not an easy choice.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I've heard these discussions about some of my friends are asking, why are there butch lesbians, for example? Why do they, if they choose not to look like women, why do they not become men? And I'm trying to explain that it's just that they don't see it as something that is necessary to look like a woman, right? Mm-hmm. So they're kind of performing their life in a different way, but it's, I think, really hard for people who have never thought about it. It's not easy to understand.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different things in what you said. In the beginning, when you were saying about your own experience of wearing makeup and feeling like a bad feminist or so on, and then you were speaking about the respect you have for people that don't fit in, I would say I have a lot of respect for feminists that wear makeup and that claim their femme identity, because in a way it's also the experience of not fitting into some requirements of feminism, and like I really feel in solidarity with a lot of femme friends and companions of feminist struggle that really have a hard time being able to express their femininity and just their mode of being happy with themselves and their physical appearance and the way they move through space without being judged as somebody that hasn't worked on dismantling the way patriarchy has them on a leash. And oftentimes there's a second jump, Like I've got rid of the leash and then I've decided I really enjoy putting my big mascara on. And who are you to say that I haven't made that jump, So I definitely feel that in these movements there's this real big contradiction of there's a set of clear rules and systemic forces that we then identify and go, okay, we don't want these. And then suddenly we apply a whole other set of rules, and then we're like, these rules are not really rules, but you better comply with them because otherwise you're not good enough, And this works for femme people, but also works for like trans people. There's also like a series of overcodings of what you need to do and have in order to be a real trans person, you know? Just like there is to be a real man or a real woman, there's also like so quickly.
But what is it? What is it? What do people think about it when they say that, you know, you're not a real trans
Well,
person?
I mean, it depends on which people. But like, people are really good at making like a set of categories based on their own experiences, you know? But the most simplistic would be, come on, but you just look like a woman, so how can you be a man? Or, come on, but you haven't even made surgery, you know? So really, you don't really want to transition, so you're really not a trans person. Or, come on, you've just made bottom, or you just made top surgery, but not the bottom, so really, you're not a real one. Or, I mean, really horrendous kind of judgment scales.
And it's also very intrusive towards a person's body, right? Because
Yes,
it's like
exactly.
checking like,
who would really,
what's happening
like,
there.
do I really ask you like how big your balls are or which one is bigger? Like, I don't, you know? So it is like, in terms of the hierarchies of power, it is very clear who feels entitled to ask these questions to who, or to judge or to require information about bodies. Like, normally it's the people that are mostly protected by hegemonic standards of beauty, which takes to also positions of power, that feel entitled to then ask curious questions about other people's bodies with a kind of tone of, oh, I'm not doing anything really violent, I'm just curious and I just want to understand more. And there's enough things out there for people to read and understand. I'm doing something wrong, right? Like
I don't know what's happening, but it's...
Not move it too much. I did this and then it's over.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm just trying to keep it really close to my mouth because it feels like here it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So here it works. Okay. You said more stuff after that. You
No.
said...
We were talking about the comments. And
Yeah, but after you talked about makeup, then you went on to talking about... What was she talking
about lesbians, about butch lesbians.
Oh, about
So-
butch lesbians, why don't they become men
Yeah.
or so on? Okay. Yeah, that's a huge one, and it causes a lot of internal troubles within feminism, and that's like going back to where we started. That you were saying, oh, did it make you angry, my invitation? And I feel a lot of these things are really wasting our energy with each other, and making big impossibilities of relationships that would make us stronger to advance in work that is really necessary, both on like legislation levels and also in terms of like internal networks of solidarity, you know, that sometimes don't even pass through policy. But if amongst people there is so much judgment of your or my choice of how to embody this feminist subjectivity here, then that's a lot of waste of energy. So when people look at butch lesbians and judge them for being too masculine for a woman or not enough masculine for a man, or to me it feels a little bit like, is this really the biggest problem that we have right now for you to be spending so much energy on? I mean, look at the state of the world, you know? If there's questions of gender in yourself, maybe dive in deep and see what the nuances of femininity and masculinity are that you want to work on, but like, let others live, you know?
But do you think it's also kind of a part of policing of women's bodies?
Absolutely,
That
yeah.
they have to comply with some kind of a standard, but it's also policing of men's bodies, right?
Yeah, because it's
'Cause
not only
women have more
lesbians
kind
that
of
feel that, yeah.
More possibilities to express themselves, but for men it's really strict, really.
Yeah, for sure. And and that takes us to, you know, the real big complexities with trans men or trans women, which get a blow from both sides, you know? And for trans women, it's like a cut that is really severe and subject to a lot of violence, because it can be one of the places in which like hyper hegemonic masculinity feels the most threatened, you know, when somebody that they would consider to be betraying masculinity decides to transition to being a woman. So yeah, all these places are of great power, but also of great vulnerability. Even, I would say, even the two main categories that historically have been established as men and women, they are of great power and great vulnerability, because the amount of pressures that men and women have felt historically to be able to comply with what has been set to be the set things that are normal for people to feel identified with is a lot. Like, even if you don't decide to dissent those categories, you spend your whole life struggling to fit in those categories, with simple things like, you know, men can't cry, you know, that's historically been a fallacious weight, and it's just a little more normalized. Oh, okay, you're gonna have to deal with the fact that society doesn't let you be sensitive and so on. But it's been there all the time. Like people that are dissenting from the gender binary are struggling with a lot of issues around that and making it visible. And I think this is so important also because it throws a mirror back on all the issues that are not made visible in those categories that were more stable before. You know, by seeing all this playing and struggling around with these subjectivities that are trying to break that, then you also look at, oh my God, but all of these things that I thought were really normal, but I've also struggled with my whole life, even if I don't decide to transition or reject gender, or you just notice, like, oh, the choice of this makeup, the choice of sitting like that, the way I stand in the metro, like all these things become more apparent, you know?
And Guardian recently did a lot of interviews with trans people, and what I found really, so there was an aspect that I never had thought about, and the aspect was about, so men who transitioned into women, they felt that they have lost a privilege, that they have, for example, they are now more afraid to walk the streets, as you said, and for women who had transitioned into men, they had a feeling that they somehow have gotten an upgrade, actually. And I thought that this is kind of a very emblematic thing that says something about our society, that you actually can transition and downgrade or upgrade as a human being. So in a way, it's very practical to be like you, so you can upgrade and downgrade without the surgery.
Yeah, I mean, practical says a lot about privilege, no? So it's very privileged to be in this body, for sure. Because also to be a non-binary person and to be white and to, you know, have physical abilities that are seen as normal, which is very like problematic idea of normal, but to also, you know, be middle class, to all these things allow me to have flexibility in my gender in a way that if these intersections weren't there, it would be a different experience also. So yeah, I think it's interesting where practical has a lot to do with other things. But when what you were saying, and also, you know, I come from like a training in theater, so that's also helped a lot to begin experiencing that really playfully in my body, how really small tricks of how to stand, how to look, how to occupy space would make a big difference in power dynamics. But those were times where I wasn't even really thinking about gender, you know, but those things were internalized in my body. And then when gender became more relevant as a set of decisions that were made for me and that I wanted to also have some say on, then those theater little tricks became useful. But what you were saying about like upgrading or downgrading in relation to transitioning for trans women or trans men, I think in a simple way that applies in that mode. Like normally, depends on your passing, you know, because if you're read as a trans woman with passing, like so passing would be that people don't necessarily read you as a trans woman, but just as a woman, and so you're not necessarily in so much danger of backlash from cis heteronormativity, because they can't tell that you're different from any other woman they know. So that's a very different mode of being in the world than trans women that are clearly making a in people's brains, you know, when they interact. The same for trans men and so on. So I would say it's not as simple as you always downgrade or upgrade or not. And also I would say that because of those experiences, it's so important to have trans people in our movements, because really the knowledge that they have based on experience of being read in one way or another and of circulating in different contexts where you know, the set of expectations and obligations and frustrations have changed so much, can be really helpful for the rest of the people that only have one specific set of experiences. So there's a lot of folks out there, like for example, doing work on you know, new masculinities or undoing like toxic masculinity. And a lot of this work is done in relationship with trans men that have a lot to say about how toxic masculinity operates, because they have experience on both sides of the spectrum. So yeah, to me, for example, when feminism thinks that it is able to exist without trans subjects, or you know, when TERFs really position themselves of like, what are these trans men doing here, or these trans women, you're like, do you even begin to see how much knowledge you're rejecting from your movement? Or do you see how much less you will be able to think, do, feel in the world if you don't also include all the teachings and the wisdom that cross these other bodies?
But it could also be about the hierarchies, that, you know, if you feel that you are kind of at the lowest level of the societal hierarchy as a, let's say, a gay or a lesbian, then, you know, these trans people come in and you realize, okay, I'm not at the bottom anymore. There's trans people, and maybe it's not very intentional, really. So there's this story about the Moscow metro. So the way the Moscow public transport. So the way how it works is that the bus driver is always at the bottom of the social hierarchy. So when a person is running to catch the bus driver is always waiting until the last second, and you've almost made it, but then he closes the door and he, you know, goes away. So now at the bottom of the society is so that person who was left.
That story would be just to show you that you're
Yes,
more at the bottom?
Yes. I was at the bottom, but look, now I'm not anymore.
Yeah.
And that maybe it's something very, not really kind of intentional, yeah? But it could be something that, you know, makes gays and lesbians to feel kind of better about themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto a hot topic there. I think that may be playing a role there as much as in so many other relationships of power, you know, between like boss and employee or bus driver and passenger. I think like feminism, just as much as anything else in our lives, requires us to really dig deep in what power means and how that can be felt without the need for hierarchy. And so when I was speaking in the beginning about identity being such a necessary mode or lens through which we can understand a set of operations that are nuancing power between different subjects, I also think that there's a limitation in what identities can do in terms of shifting those powers, because the power shift normally works with one has more, one has less. And there is a lot of need of changing that scale, tipping it over, and really changing historical patterns. And super important that those who had a lot of space take up less space. A lot of, economic stability, really check themselves out and work through historical governmental process of retribution and all that. But also, I think there's other modes of engaging with power that must and need to go beyond that, and also to include a wider metabolism, to include nature, to include wind, to include earth, to include other processes of feeling existentially validated and in power, holding integrity and dignity as places of power within each person. That there's another author that I really enjoy, Angel Kyodo Williams, who's a black queer Buddhist, who's written a book that I adore, Radical Dharma, talking race, love, and liberation. And she has an exercise where she gets people to embody this sense of integrity and dignity through, some physical movements. And then she really says, I invite you to feel this in your body, because integrity, dignity, relationality has not been given to you, and so has not the possibility to be taken away from you. It is you. It is an inherent force, a place of power that is constitutively part of being alive. So I think these two things need to operate at the same time. We need to see how to shift power dynamics, and what can that passenger do in terms of not allowing that bus driver to feel like, let me shit on the next person that I...
Let's switch. Maybe a miracle will happen.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, so those places are really checking each other out in realizing that these hierarchical structures have a strong hold on us. And also, I personally think this work needs to happen in parallel to not being only relying on solutions happening in this sphere. Also working on other levels of being in relation to wider metabolisms, so that we're not always seeking validation or a sense of belonging or a need to be seen or be given value because of what we do or what we represent. If that was not such a place of insecurity for humans all the time, because even in the highest place of power, it feels like people are trying to get proof of their power all the time, and in order to do that, they have to keep esmagando, when you did that with a cockroach, like
killing.
Yeah, but like really squishing.
Yes.
That so much of the ways that we have learned to understand power have been about what size of thing we can squish,
But you're talking about integrity, and but have microphone.
Why don't we just change?
Okay. Yes,
we swap around.
Because it's low battery.
Yeah.
Since that. So have you all struggled with finding your integrity? Like, what has been your path? Maybe you can tell.
It's like
Sorry.
this.
Yeah.
I still do. I still do. And And also, I think as I get older, I am starting to sense into something that is also a place in which things are and they aren't at the same time, all the time. Like paradox is really alive. Before I used to think more about like ambiguity, you know, and more like this place that, you know, art doesn't need to like trap things into one meaning and it can leave it open and so on. And there's some of that that's still alive for me, but also like the more I get older and the more I really see that one thing is and it isn't, like really at the same time. And so, you know, gender is really important and it's so not important, you know? And so the sense of integrity comes to me as a question in each moment of what sets of importances am I giving to things in each relationship? Because of course, if I get into political spheres and I go like, oh, you know, let's forget about identity, we're all humans, let's just love each other, it's like, wrong, you know, wrong way of coming into this, because you're really invisibilizing all the different violences that are crossing these bodies that are here, and that's not going to get us anywhere. But also, if that's the only lens, and that's just where we're working from, and that's been my experience in a lot of political movements, including transfeminist and anti-racist movements, we also end up really wounded and really tired and needing to really lie down and be buried in earth for like a month just to feel that there's life where it doesn't seem to be, and then resurface again and go to another protest. So there's to me like a need to be able to be traveling in between these spheres in every relationship, but the sense of integrity can be really like a struggling place when I get that balance wrong, you know? Sometimes I want to bring a little bit more of a need of connection in the body, or of being able to have even physical intimacy between people, or also openness to spirituality and those things. But in certain contexts, we're not really ready for those conversations, and we need to get other things straight. You know, in contexts where there's a lot of sexism, where there's a lot of homophobia, I can't really be speaking of, yes, let's just touch each other with respect, because there's a lot of other things there that need to be in place. And sometimes I get that balance wrong. Like, I didn't think I did that yesterday. And then that really questions my sense of
What happened
integrity,
yesterday?
you know. Ouch. I don't know if there's people from yesterday's workshop here. No? Okay, they might hear the podcast. Yeah, the workshop of awareness, which really is facilitated by dear friends of mine. And, you know, it was setting really important modes of understanding respect and care, and ways in which we can show up if somebody is in a situation that is unsafe or dangerous in like a party context or so on. And so we were doing some exercises that were really about defining distance between us, and super, super important, because really tendency is that people socialized as men feel very entitled to people socialized as women, and in party contexts that really plays a big part and can lead to really strong violences, from micro violences to really big sexual aggressions. So that work's super important. And also at the same time, I felt that my body didn't know how to really require those kinds of boundaries with people that I was intuitively wanting to be in trust with. so that I could see that those protocols that we were doing were really useful in terms of learning body language for other situations where trust wasn't there. But in this context, my body wanted to foster trust. And so I was being a little too open physically for what we were trying to do, I felt. And also in the interventions that I made, I felt that maybe I was inviting some problematizing, sort of saying like, yeah, but in Brazil we dance really close, like things like that I'm not sure were very helpful for the work that we were doing there. So I haven't been able to talk to my colleagues about that yet. So if you hear this, know that I apologize if I fucked it up.
So, which is actually, I wasn't there yesterday, but it is really a struggle for me usually. The boundaries, like so in Latvia we really value our space, so it's especially awkward when you have other Latvians going, for example, to a seminar in Balkans where people hug and kiss, and it's just so fucking confusing. So in some countries it's 2 kisses, in some countries it's 3 kisses. I never know from which cheek to start, so sometimes we start in the middle. It's getting even more awkward. I'm also like, when I see that someone is coming, it's going to happen, I just, okay, be cool, and I'm like, okay, and instead of 2, it's 3, okay, failed again. And then these Latvians and Estonians, they also hug and kiss each other, which is just totally weird. We would never normally do it, but when we are in this new setting, so we have to comply with these standards. And I find it kind of a constant struggle all the time, and it happens because I know that it's socially acceptable, and it would be really awkward to say, I'm sorry, I'm Latvian, like 50 centimeters around me, please don't touch me. Because I also want to appear friendly, right? So it's really hard.
And how does it actually feel for your body? Like when you're in a country where people greet more physically?
Yeah.
Like, does your body feel that experience is like not nice at all, or there's a discomfort? And for you, yeah. Somebody in the audience just shouted that yes, it's horrible.
For most of them.
For most, is it?
It's kind of a grief situation, really.
Yeah.
So the body just goes in like panic mode of like, what are you doing in here?
I mean, there is this quote about a man is not a lonely island. In Latvia, a man is
a lonely island.
Is a lonely island.
Wow, that's a strong thing to say.
You can see that in bus seats or something where everybody separates and so forth. I'm sorry to...
No, that's right.
No, that's beautiful. I don't know if you want to repeat that for the podcast. I don't know if people hear it. But.
No, well, I think it's gonna be okay. A friend of mine actually, who is here, she was wearing a shirt that says, "Please, you're standing too close." And I said, may I now hug you? And she said, yeah, you can hug me. But and then she said, but my colleagues are still not like reading this note at all, and they are always standing too close to me. So even it's not helping. So yeah. Well, anyways, not all Latvians are probably like this. And well, if you are in a kind of in a different country, or then it's kind of okay, I think. But if you are here, and for example, you don't know completely that person, or especially actually if it's men, for me it's getting awkward when men I don't know are hugging and kissing me. Mm-hmm. It's just it crosses my boundaries. Mm-hmm. But I would never say anything because I want to appear nice, mm-hmm. which is another burden. And then I feel like a bad feminist because, of course, I felt bad. I didn't say anything about it. And I still did it, and so I feel like a failure most of the time in my life. But it's a story about me.
One thing to that, I think failing expectations is like a human reality, because we're also constructing new possibilities. When we're failing expectations, we're constructing new possibilities. And I think that's something that really goes well with being alive, right? With opening up new modes of being. And because we share such different experiences, when two sets of expectations and come into relation, the amount of possibility of failure is huge. But in that failure, the amount of possibility of something else happening is just as huge. So if we interpret that like two systems coming together and jarring as system relationality failed, one way of looking at it, but two systems coming together, not doing what the expectations of these two systems were, but doing something else is, ooh, spark of new possibility in the system, which is, you know, maybe when we went, that's what sparked, you know? Or one body, heart, one body, and then this body started feeling like, ooh, I really learned about my boundary in this interaction. Because for me, for example, as somebody that's been socialized like in Brazil with a lot of touching, I feel it's very, very hard for me to greet people at a distance. And I really feel like I fail either the people or myself with this mode of, if we really keep a distance, I'm like, oh, that felt so not what my body would want and need. But at the same time, I think that's what I read from yours. But also a lot of the time my experience in other countries, I don't have enough experience with Latvian islands, but in other countries where people touch a little, like in the UK, I lived a long time there. And my experience there was that slowly I would discover people actually really enjoyed to have more touch. You know, at first they would say, no, I don't like, and then suddenly they would like see me on the other side of the street and just run to hug because they knew that the Brazilian was available for a hug, you know? So it's like failure is always there, but possibility is also there too.
And also, of course, sometimes touching is also a way how to somehow exert dominance. Yes, for example, sometimes men at leadership positions are, you know, touching women like, yes, good job, good job, good job. And it's just like, oh wow, I feel like a dog now. That's great. and I used to not notice it, but now I have started noticing these things because, well, I also like touching people, yeah. So, well, anyway. So so you're originally from Brazil, right?
Kind of.
Kind of. So Brazil is a very odd country in a way that it's very conservative. It's a Catholic country, right? But then it's more at the forefront with the LGBT rights than some countries in Europe. Although with Bolsonaro, it's like really not clear what's going to happen there. So would you want to talk a bit about this? Because it's really interesting that a Catholic country can also have gay marriage. For me, it's this thing that, you know, I just don't really understand.
Yeah, I don't understand either. But I can tell you a little bit about my experiences and my feelings about Brazil are that it's a lot more complex than any understanding allows for really simplifications. And that's why I love it so much. There's such a mixture of different influences there, and there is such a complexity of embodiments and ways that subjectivities have historically constituted themselves. There's no clear sense of what a Brazilian should look like or act like. And so there is space for a lot of conservatives and also for a lot of different modes of liberals, progressive, alternative, dissenting communities. And I think most of the spaces in which this other mode of being has been really alive have just not been visible for a long time historically, but they have been very, very present. And I have a feeling that this is similar to a lot of other countries. And with, the rise of like internet and circulation of documentation from realities that are not normally the ones that circulate in wider mainstream TV, we have started to notice more of these lives that are always been pulsing there, which has given great strength to LGBTQIT communities in Brazil, but also great fear to conservative people of going like, oh my God, there's really a lot of you here and you're way too dangerous, and has also increased the fear of power changing because you can feel the power that these people have. And to those who have always had power in different ways, and in religion and states have always had quite a promiscuous relationship, and those people then, in their fear of losing the form of things by which their power was granted, then go in the mode of, what do we need to do for things not to change? And then conservative wave comes, and I think it's in its very different complexity, but there's similarities to other waves of fascism, like neo-fascisms around Europe coming very strongly, where there is a great fear that things would be different from what people have thought they were, because they are. Things, real power, like, I don't mean legislation or financial power, because that is still held by cis hetero-colonial hegemonic subjects. But the real power, the one that we were talking before, the power that cannot be taken away from you, that's never been there. And I think that's been noticed. And because of that fear of like, whoa, that power is also really powerful, and we don't want you to have all that power, so let's take all the steps that we can to grant that this other power in legislation and economy is as much on this side of the playing field as possible, because we're scared. Like, people are really scared of having their stability threatened, and their stability is hanging on such thin strings, that have to do with, being exerting places of supremacy in all the lines of the identity intersections that we were talking about. Like, it's white people have to really assert their power over all the rest of people of color. Men have to assert their power on all the rest of the gender spectrum, and so on and so forth.
And I think it's a very interesting aspect, and I've actually never thought about it. The visibility, that it's kind of something that we are really eager to have, the visibility of our voices and our faces, and that we are different, and that we are normal as well as sometimes not normal, and just to show the diversity that we are a part of a society, right? LGBTQIA community. But then that sometimes this visibility can actually turn against you, that sometimes it's actually better not to be that visible. And I think that, well, to be honest, what I haven't solved in my mind is that when you sometimes speak about, here in Latvia, when you speak about the partnership law, then the argument is, yes, well, what's going to happen next? Marriage. And I have a feeling that we should say, no, we are not interested in marriage, although we are really interested in marriage. We are really interested in taking that as well. And then someone might say, and after marriage, what happens? Well, usually they say goats happen. But
goats.
Yes, what's going to happen when, it's a classic political, actually, narrative here. So at first people start marrying people of their own gender, and then they start marrying goats.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but it might not happen with goats, but it might happen with 3 people, and having living in polyamorous relationships where you kind of want also the kind of legal settlement there, and you want to have 3 parents for a child, like in Canada, and sometimes I'm thinking that maybe we shouldn't say like what's the end game here. That it's probably like 6 people living together and raising maybe 10 kids. I don't know. And a goat, clearly, and we should just say no. We just want it's for our apartments that we are owned together. We just need the partnership law. We don't need anything else, because that visibility might turn against us. So I warned you that you will need to tell 2 things. One is how you have recently fucked up, and I wanted to ask if you already told this story.
It's one of
yesterday,
them.
Yeah.
that was a recent fuck up.
And
I'm sure
so,
I fucked up
is there
with him
anything
and,
really awesome that you would want to tell us that you've done that you are really proud of?
That's like the same question.
That was the same.
Well, kind of like to ask me something really awesome. Probably the only thing I could do is fuck this question up. I really don't know how to answer to that. Well, okay, I'm gonna tell it from a really personal place. I think in my recent life, it's been really awesome to overcome a huge depression cycle. A place in which I was stuck for many years on a loop, and then in the last round was like a strong hold on me for a couple of years. And there were a lot of things that contributed for that to be possible to turn over. But it gave me great sense of strength to see that through the things that I was doing, and it includes things like this, be here talking to you all about things that matter for me, that it was possible to feel that although the world is really quite fucked up in so many ways, and when we pay attention to those things, they are really huge, and they can really overcome our possibility to open our eyes and to get out of bed and to believe in any new relationship, or even in our sense of being able to hold previous relationships with anything, with people or with environment and all that. But also when we start paying attention to the amazing things that are happening and to the incredible people that are resisting and creating all sorts of forms of regeneration, resilience, other forms of kinship and family constituencies, other modes of being with each other, being with the environment. When you start paying attention to those things, they are also really there and have always been. And that is like another one of those dualities that for me are completely present, but that I feel have been amazing to be able to sense with the same strength. So like if I can recall a place of greatness in myself, is having been able for a set of different influences in both internal work and also like different help from a lot of things externally to turn up that volume of the radio of the amazing things that are happening, at least as loud as the shit. And so, to have those 2 notches available to me, because that one was broken for a while.
Okay. Thank you for sharing this. And I think we need to finish. Thank you for coming all. And we are going to continue with the recordings tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And then also we're going to have women's stand-up here at 3 tomorrow. And
can I say something about the workshop?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. But also I wanted to say that at 1:30 I'm giving a workshop here till 4:30. And there's a list of the names there, so if you'd like to participate, it would be amazing to have you, and just put your name on the list. And thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Applause. Thank you.